Guys, hello, it's time to take a quick dump because we have it on good authority that you shouldn't be on the toilet for longer than 12 minutes. So we've created these lovely little mini episodes for you to listen on the loo. And if the episode finishes and you haven't done your shit, you have to leave.
You ain't gotta go home, but you gotta get the hell out of that cubicle.
Akkermensia is a type of bacteria that feeds on the mucus lining of the gut. So when we aren't eating and we're fasted and there's no food in us, it allows this bacteria to come out and feed on the mucus lining and basically grow. And there is some studies to show that fasting can increase the levels. So there's actually a study during Ramadan, which is the holy month of Islam, where they fast. They see in the gut microbiome that the levels of this bacteria increases in line with the fasting. So fasting is one potential way to increase levels of that, but you probably see those benefits with about 12 to 14 hours of fasting, which is very achievable. In fact, most of us probably do that anyway without knowing. So you have your tea at 8 o'clock and then you have your breakfast at 8 a.m. the following day. That's a 12-hour fast. So I don't think there's necessarily any more benefits to fasting for longer than 12 to 14 hours, other than just getting hangry, really. You know, when you do fast, every roughly 4 hours, you get this sort of cleaning wave in your gut. That's called the MMC, or the migrating motor complex. When your stomach rumbles, we associate it with being hungry, but it's usually the MMC working. So you get this sort of, I compare it to like a dishwasher cycle. So it's usually about 4 hours after eating, or once your stomach is completely emptied, the MMC kicks in, and there's different cycles. There's like a slow cycle, a medium cycle, and a fast cycle, which lasts about 10 minutes, which is usually how long our stomach rumbles for. And what's happening is your stomach and small intestine, there's a ramp up in activity to basically brush all of the food and bacterial debris on into the colon. Then it can be expelled as waste. But this only happens when we're fasted. So the longer you fast for, the more MMCs you get. And what we see is that in some people who have a dysfunctional MMC, they're more likely to have tummy issues and basically an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine where bacteria shouldn't really be. So most of our bacteria and gut microbiome is in the colon, in the large bowel at the end of the gut. But the small intestine, the first part of your bowel, is where we do all of our absorption and digestion of nutrients. And if we are not, basically, if there's an overgrowth of bacteria there, they will break down the food before we have chance to. SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, is when there's too many bacteria in the small intestine and they're breaking down food before we have the chance, which when they do break down food, they produce gases and toxins and other metabolites. And because the small bowel is really sensitive, then this can cause some symptoms like bloating, tummy pains. And when the bacteria ferment the food, they produce different gases. And depending on the gas that they produce can also cause changes to your bowel habit. For example, if they produce methane is associated with constipation. And if they produce hydrogen sulfide, which you probably will know if you've got farts that smell like eggs, that's associated with looser stools as well. So Candida is it's a bit similar to parasites in that I think a lot of people are sort of over-egging it as a cause of symptoms. Candida is almost in everyone's gut microbiome. We've done studies of healthy people, and we found that more than 1 in 2 of them have Candida in their gut. But just like bacteria may overgrow in the small intestine, Candida probably can as well, especially if you've had a history of thorough antibiotic use. So when you take antibiotics, they kill off the bacteria, and bacteria and yeast and fungi compete in the gut. So if there's no bacteria for the yeast to compete with, then they can flourish. So we know that Candida and SIFO, so small intestinal fungal overgrowth, is a thing because there's studies in America where they've basically taken samples from the small intestine and they've cultivated it and shown that there's too much yeast and fungi there. The only issue is there isn't really a non-invasive way to test for that, like we have with SIBO. So it really is sort of trying to be intuitive about it.
Breath test.
Breath testing, yeah. So with SIBO, you can do a breath test. You take a sugar. If there's bacteria in the small intestine, they'll feed on that sugar and produce gas, and then that gas crosses through your gut into your bloodstream, into your lungs, you expel that in breath. So we can look for SIBO in an easy, simple, non-invasive way. With yeast and Candida, we're not really sure how we can do that yet. There is something called auto-brewery syndrome. Have you heard of this?
No.
So basically, when you have an overgrowth of Candida in your gut, it turns into a brewery. And
Like as in beer.
Like as in beer. So when you have a lot of sugar, the yeast ferment that, and they produce ethanol. So H. pylori is, unlike most bacteria, which die in stomach acid, H. pylori produces an enzyme which allows it to survive there. And there's quite a funny story about someone who won a Nobel Prize for basically discovering that H. pylori causes stomach ulcers. His name was Barry Marshall. And he was a doctor who had all these patients with stomach ulcers and hypothesized that it was bacteria in the stomach causing the stomach ulcers, but nobody else believed him because he said nothing could grow in stomach acid. It's probably stress and too much alcohol. And he couldn't find the means to test his hypothesis, so he did it on himself. He basically drank the stomach juice from his patients with ulcers, gave himself an ulcer, and then took antibiotics to get rid of the bacteria which treated the ulcer.